Hey dreamers, it's for you. So I decided to go ahead with my idea to record the novel that I've been writing. It's still a work in progress, though I do have about 75,000 words written. It's past halfway, but still not done. In any case, I decided to record a reading of it here on the channel because I'm really curious to hear what people will think and if they'll enjoy the story and hopefully spur me on to finally finish it. But I'm always really excited to hear feedback from people and what they think and how they feel that it's going and things that could be improved on and all that kind of stuff. And it's quite difficult to find people willing enough to read unfinished draft of a book a lot of the time. So I thought anyway I'd record a reading of it here on the channel and see what everyone thinks, and hopefully you enjoy it. The book is called The Fate of Shadows, and it is set in a fantasy world kind of akin to that of Game of Thrones, or maybe Lord of the Rings, but not quite so deep in fantasy with other races. The thumbnail and map you see on screen is also a map I made for this book as well, which not so much in the first chapter, but later on will give you a bit of an idea of the scale and locations that are mentioned in the story. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it all. A small warning, there is mild coarse language in it, and also some scenes, particularly the first chapter of the book, is a little brutal and I don't want to say gory, but it's a bit violent. So warning to that, but the rest of the book is not so akin to that, particularly the second chapter. So sorry if violence and that kind of stuff is not your shtick in books, and I promise the whole book is not like that. It's just in particular fighting scenes. The next scene will be deeply focused around the central main character, and which there is a few main characters. Others will be introduced a little later on. And it is somewhat of a love story too that is included in this as well, though it is not the central theme, so don't expect a Romeo or Juliet type story. I plan to do roughly half an hour recordings of going chapter by chapter through the book and starting with the first chapter here. So yeah, tell me what you think and if you'd like to hear more. Without further ado, here is my book and I hope you enjoy. Of bright suns set in blood cast the deepest shadows born in sorrow, the pages of the ancient. Chapter 1. The Hunter. It was a beautifully tranquil morning, as it always was in such unadulterated woods, a place anyone with any appreciation of the beauty carved by the Fae could find peace in, or a heartbeat to be the next feast. It was ever both for him, the hunter. He knew how to slip by each tree like it was nothing ill-placed by nature. He knew how to treat the ferns like a lover, caressed and kept quiet in a gentle touch. His feet made no sound save what could be taken as merely the wind's breath. The wilds dare not whisper as he graced them by. They respected one another, hunter in the hands of nature, a balance maintained even when blood-stained virgin leaves. So when he had found his unwary prey, its fate was sealed, a life destined to end under the glistening morning rays. All was one with the bliss he relished, the songs of the birds greeting the day, the cathartic kissing of leaves in the breeze, the gentle melody of a nearby river, and soon to join them, the bleeding carcass of slaughtered prey, the balance upheld as all life is fated. She grazed calmly ahead, impossible to know of the looming murderous intent closing in with every serene moment. Leaves quietly crackled, rustled, nothing she hadn't heard beyond countless times. The hunter knew how to perfectly regulate his weight and steps, moving so silently under the guise of foliage that no ears would hear any more than a gentle breeze. Death drew nearer, 3 strides away, then 2. Hidden well beneath the dense brush. A vicious, sly, dark steel scimitar slid from its den, one of 2 finely crafted jet-black murderers he bore. Breath slowed to nothing more than an occasional sip of air, lest his human stench betray his presence. The wicked blade slithered ever closer. No amount of experience or nature-given adept senses could protect her from this predator, his sting more fatal than any. The young elk felt a slight chill brush by its neck. Then the cold grew, engulfing its body and will to stand as the dirt beneath turned to bloody mud. Legs collapsing and a gurgled bark for help would become its last memory. And the whole forest grew just a little bit quieter. The hunter emerged, slithering his dark sword back into its sheath. Once blood halted its painting of the forest floor, he tied rope by its legs, and over his strong shoulders it hung. He always waited until the crimson river ran dry, lest his clean and dark coat be stained by his victim. The forest saw him now, his presence no longer lurking but striding with prize in hand through the autumn leaves. A victorious hunter, a merciless killer. A young black hound emerged with him from her hidden weight, ready and hungry for her fresh meal with her only master, and his only true friend. "Come on, Rhea," he said cheerfully. "Let's go make us a feast." And with the still warm elk's blood left behind, the squeaking vermin of the tranquil forest could crawl out for a meal of their own, and the forest grew just a little louder again. Chapter 1, Scene 2. He watched silently from nearby brushes as the thugs stalked his camp. They were scruffy, vile men, hardly a white tooth to be seen among them. They looked, and smelt, like they hadn't bathed in years. He scrutinized them for some minutes, gauging their skill and ensuring he knew their exact numbers. Not that, even if there were 10 such bandits, he would feel intimidated. Most, seeking the best advantage, might have waited to catch them by surprise. But where was the fun in that? These scruffy ruffians were weak, undisciplined, nameless, and no threat to him. He motioned for Rhea to sit by and wait where she was, and she obediently put her furry behind to the ground. The hunter quietly placed his kill to the dying leaves, and moved from the brushes to stand before them, his cheeks plain and welcoming without an essence of fear. "I see you've found my camp. How may I be of service?" he asked politely, like a barman to a common patron. "What? Who the hell are you?" one bandit stammered, hand hovering over the hilt of a rusty cutlass. It was evident they were taken back by his figure, yet such a reaction was familiar to him. It was unlikely they had seen any man dressed as he. Fine jet-black leather coat and tunic strapped tight, small knives strapped about his waist. Weapons, scimitar by his side and short sword angled slightly downward hanging from his back. All finely crafted and highly expensive. His features were also likely sterner and finer than most local men they had seen approaching their mid-30th winter. And certainly none with such well-kept long black hair. Surely he resembled no other hunter or man the filthy ruffians had ever seen. The bandit drew his blade, apparently making him more confident in his words. "Give over them swords and your coin," he hesitantly demanded, pointing to the hunter's waist with the cheap, crusty old sword. "Then I be thinking we'll be taking that fancy coat of yours too." The hunter shook his head as his arms crossed over his chest. Now, that's no way to greet someone, is it?" "What? Do you think this is some kind of game? We'll kill you, don't think we won't, and you wouldn't be the first. Drop them weapons!" "You wouldn't expect a man to hand over his mother, would you?" The bandit's response came only as a unified, confused glare. "To me, departing from these weapons is of equal offence." "Are you a shitbrain or what? We'll just kill you, that's fine with us. What'd you prefer?" one shouted. "Bet this one's just a mutton head with a wealthy daddy," another one added with a shared, disgustingly croaky laugh. "You'll kill me?" the hunter echoed. Sorry, how's that? I don't quite understand." His face was of genuine confusion, as though he were threatened by a cheeky child. "Stop messing with us! You wake up shit-faced! There's 4 of us! You ain't be fighting us all!" "Why not? Do ravens feast upon the dragon before its death?" the hunter referenced from a famous script known only as The Ancient. Not that he really expected this bunch of clearly uneducated ruffians to recognise the verse. "Oi, listen to this, fellas. This guy thinks pretty big of himself for a hunter. That's how mighty you think you are after I put this blade in your belly." At last, apparently fed up with the hunter's antics, the first charged for him. "You nameless insects are so repulsive," the hunter muttered under his facade. And another fate was sealed. The hunter stood still, expressionless, not a glimpse of fear to be seen. The ruffian's blade lifted, ready for an easy kill. But, a moment before it could slash down, the hunter sprung into motion. He caught the slow attacker's wrist, stomped on his foot, and used his other hand to jab the ruffian's wrist. He knew exactly where to hit to cause the man to release his grip on the blade. And, in a motion that was as elegant as a dance, he caught the falling rusty sword, and around it whipped to its original bearer. The bandit fell to the dirt, clutching the unceasing leak from an open throat. His gurgling now a call to the forest vermin for a feast. The hunter was left standing as casually as he did before, glancing over the acquired blade. "A repulsive sword," the hunter scorned. "It sickens me, yet it is fitting against such repulsive cretins as yourself." "What? How could you? Look here what he's done to Grund! Get him!" came a shocked cry, and the remaining 3 thugs finally charged. He recognized the familiar fury for revenge in their eyes, but it could do them no good. More of the nameless to fall, he murmured only to himself. Again, he made no move to ready himself in their advance, but kept the acquired rusty blade by his side. The first attack came in, but its direction made for an easy dodge, leaving him in position to give a harsh kick to the ruffian's stomach. The thug was sent reeling from pain and momentum onto the ground to grant the hunter a moment. And a moment was all he needed. The next 2 attackers were immediately upon him. The hunter parried one with his stolen weapon and grabbed the wrist of the other as it slashed. But rather than catch it still as he had done before, he overpowered the inexperienced opponent and forced the momentum of the grappled bandit's blade to an alternate direction. It cut flesh and severed the other attacker's hand as he was coming in for another, predictable swing. His weapon fell, still clutched by the disconnected hand. The rather literally disarmed ruffian collapsed to the ground screaming in agony. In the hunter's same movement, he threw, with an added harsh push from his shoulder, the grabbed bandit into the first attacker he kicked, who was just rising to rejoin the fight. They both collapsed, one atop the other, back to the dirt. And he was upon them immediately. With great force, the hunter drove his stolen blade down into the chest of the first, and further through into the stomach of the second. Their attack permanently ceased as they spattered and gurgled their last moments impaled by a weapon once their ally. The hunter rose casually and crunched over blood-stained autumn leaves to the reeling and groaning ruffian that was clutching his stumped arm. "I was about to say that I warned you, but I don't actually think I did I?" the hunter asked honestly, as he placed a curious hand on his chin. The bandit's attention finally left his own agony to realize the fate of his acquaintances. "Who are you?" the ruffian asked through several groaning breaths, confusion and bewilderment flickering through his grimace. "See, was that so hard? That's what you should have started with, not 'give us your swords and your coin,'" the hunter replied in a grumpy and exaggerated impression of the ruffians. "As to who I am, there is no simple answer. People have taken to calling me a few names. Some once called me Nightstalk, though it seems Kingsbane is what folk have taken a liking to of late. I think that sounds rather bland, though. What do you think?" The defeated man's eyes almost came out of their sockets. The hunter almost laughed. That look was always priceless. The look when they realized it, when they realized they had kicked the hornet's nest. When they knew just whose unreflecting eyes stare back at them. You're Kingsbane? You're the one who killed King Owen?" "Word spread far these days, doesn't it?" I'm sorry, please forgive me," the ruffian pleaded as his terror formed tears. "I'll never bother ye again, I swear, please." His eyes showed such true fear, the fear that filled one's being when they stare death in the face and know they have nothing to offer it. The hunter pulled a merciless grin behind a face of false empathy. "It's okay, I believe you," the hunter comforted with a gentle voice. And the ruffian drew a deep sigh of relief. "But what of all those you've killed, robbed and raped?" the hunter continued, his tone still gentle and comforting. "You spare no thought for the dead, and so I'll spare no thought for you, nameless one." The ruffian's eyes snapped up as he realized. He attempted a few final mutters in protest, but the words got caught in his throat, along with a black short sword. So those words came out as no more than spluttering gurgles. The nameless man's lifeless body fell to the dirt, sword slipping from his neck with the fall. The hunter yanked a length of the cleanest part of the bandit's tunic he could find, and used it to clean his blade of crimson. He arose with a yawn. The forest did seem quieter now, a calm he enjoyed. After retrieving his hunt again, a whistle had his faithful friend bound back to his side. "Well, girl," he said with a playful smile, "I think it's time we found a new camp." Chapter 2. A Fair Game. "Your Grace, King Haeneas has requested for you in the Great Hall at once," the steward announced, drawing sighs from the room's two occupants. "Of course," the prince murmured. With a disappointed look to his opponent, he flicked over his king piece on the board between them. "My father always seems to know when to interrupt a fair game." "Not to worry, Your Grace. We may continue this at a later date." His opponent, another attendant by the name Houdin, consolidated. "We best not keep your father waiting." A resigned nod accompanied the prince as he rose from the game. Reality had unfortunately called him back. As he strode from his royal chamber, his delicate fingers reclasped the belt about his lower torso tight against his fine brown tunic. He knew well to do this before entering the great hall, so not to have an inappropriate appearance, so his father would say. He was always doing something supposedly improper or unfit of royalty. He just called it the curse of his station. After a few minutes of walking the sunset-lit palace corridors, Prince Rallis and the steward arrived before the large, carved wooden doors that marked the entrance to Liafrin's great hall. He took one last quiet moment before the uproar beyond would steal his peaceful day. Despite all the banquets, celebrations, and royal occasions he had attended within, he was never quite used to the pandemonium of 100 chattering lords, nobles, ladies, and whoever else was fortunate enough to receive an invitation. Though fortunate would be if Rallis could give his invitation to some other grateful fool, he thought. The great doors creaked wide as two soldiers stationed guards outside heaved the doors ajar. And into the great hall he went. Though, with the passing of so many cruel years, the great hall was no longer as great as times past. Unceasing warfare with the bloodthirsty Farskins had kept their treasuries in strict order. But for Raconians, it was of no severe matter, for they were an old, proud nation that valued their abundant history more than gold or lavish adornments. And no amount of neglect could diminish the hall's size. Tall wood pillars cut from the massive trees native to Raconia's lush lands shouldered the high roof and floor 90 feet in length. Each pillar was carved ornately, in the fashion common to the times near 800 years past when they were first erected. The peeling walls held fading paintings of fables and history every Raconian child knew. The hall also maintained its same importance it had for centuries as the hub for delegations and ceremonies for the Old Kingdom. Presently, it was a royal banquet, though a Raconian royal banquet was really just a loud party of cheery, drunk old men in royal presence. And it was brimming with such occupants. Cheering, music, shouting, dancing, and ale refreshing the stains that had only just began to fade on the aged wood. He soon spotted his father amongst the crowd, not a difficult task given the horde gathered cheering his name. It seemed he was once again locked in an arm wrestle with some noble the prince recognised but whose name he had never bothered committing to memory. This was often how his glorious father, King Hneus, celebrated victory. He had won the Battle of Dornweir to defend Raconia's southern lands against another Fascan conquest to seize their fertile ground and plentiful supply of timber. Such a victory was, of course, as good a reason as any for his father to break open wine caskets. "Ah, Rallis, my son!" King Hneus shouted. Without even a glance to the opponent, his father halted his toying game and threw the weak man to the ground, resulting in a great many cheers and exchanged bets, before moving to greet his only child. "Where must you run off to all the time?" the king asked as he snatched another cup of wine from a passing attendant, spilling most of it. They were an odd sight, side by side. Any that did not know the two were father and son would likely not guess such, as physically they had little in common. Rallis grew curly black hair to about chin length compared to his father's short brown style. Rallis's features were fine and sharp, his father's wide and rigid. Even their physique was completely opposite. Rallis was mid-height and slim, muscles reflecting someone who rarely attended any training. Hneus was wide and bulky, with an ever-growing belly of a king whose years were hot on his heels. And, of course, the king had his extensive brown beard that likely held more missing things than the magical and mysterious spell tear. Rallis, however, had no facial hair to speak of, choosing to maintain a clean-shaven appearance. Evidently, Rallis had inherited much more of his mother's side, something his father often admitted was fortunate. Though, unfortunately, she had passed before his third winter, and he was now nigh on his 21st. "You know that I don't enjoy such occasions, father. All these trivial conversations are beyond dull." "Bah, you must learn to meet and greet people and get along, whether you enjoy it or not. When you become king, you'll often need to call upon such acquaintances," his father explained, for what felt like the 100th time. The king concluded by shoving a cup into Rallis's hands and pushing him along. "Away with you, eat, drink and be merry, and don't let me hear of you sneaking off again," he insisted in a playful tone, yet Rallis knew those words were serious. He respected his father. He only wished that the king would realise their differences. But he had given up on that hope long ago, and so he had learnt to just play along to the fantasy. A fantasy that he saw every time his eyes met the carved log throne that resided on the far podium of the hall. No matter how prominent their differences seemed to be, King Hneus never ceased to try to mould the young man into his own youthful image. His father had been a strong, independent leader, fierce in battle and ever ready for the kingship duty he was born to inherit, so everyone said. Yet that was, in almost every way, the precise opposite of Rallis. But his father held tight to that fantasy of seeing Rallis the same way someday. So, the prince put on his practiced occasion face, a vibrant, fake, and heavy smile he always wore to such events. A smile that said he was enjoying himself, that laughed at every blunt and unoriginal joke he was told, and hid his hollow interest at every lord's recently born fifth nephew. But truly, such things were among the most disinteresting topics imaginable to Rallis. He would much prefer to be reading, playing chess, or even studying Fasca's deployments in order to prepare and counter their future plans. He enjoyed strategy, thinking ahead, acquiring knowledge and knowing about the world. Not about the failing sexual performance of the last lord he had just spoken to. But Rallis knew not many, or any it seemed, shared his opinion. So he had learnt how to take part in such chatter and meet people. Which he really knew meant listen and pretend to care about the affairs of all the powerful lords and ladies. So his influence was not isolated when he was to inherit the throne. Not that he really ever gave serious consideration to that future. As he continued his monotonous stroll, he found a few familiar faces amongst the crowd. There was Pexivus, Raconia's most renowned sage, the man responsible for all things mysterious, magical, and whimsical in the kingdom, though the man was one face that similarly did not appear to be enjoying the festivities. Likely, he wished to be among his books and notes where he spent most of his time. His entire life the old sage had been obsessed with studying the event commonly referred to as the Cataclysm, a long-past magical phenomenon that split the continent in two, along with the mysterious island of Curious and the spell tear that resulted of it. This meant, of course, that he wasn't the most entertaining man to converse with, unless one wished to talk about only such topics for endless hours. Beyond him, further to the back, there was another familiar face, one he was pleased to see. Octrus, the royal guard commander, an honoured knight and Raconia's most distinguished warrior. He was often referred to as the Olive Knight, as he wore distinctive silver-lined olive-green armour, a gift for his service that represented the rare olive-green Corleus rose that flowered only within the lush climate of Raconia, the centrepiece of the Raconian flag and sigil. The renowned warrior was in his late 30s now, yet his years were behind his features. Many years of battles and training had hardened his appearance. His cheekbones were pronounced, eyes a dark brown like the short hair atop his head, and a short, fine beard of the same hue. Octrus's face had a way of representing the years of experience he held, not just in battle, but in life. The Olive Knight was one of the few people Rallis enjoyed a conversation with in the palace, as the knight wasn't some sheltered, pretty-talking noble like most. He wasn't high-born, but acquired his title through years of distinguishing himself. So, he always had many tales to tell, lessons to teach, and experience to share. He knew the wide world for what it was, gruesome, mysterious, and unbiased. Similar could be said of the commander's company. He sat among other distinguished knights of Raconium. Around them lay countless empty wine jugs. Presumably, they discussed and shared tales of their courageous feats upon the battlefield. He saw Kanan was also there, unsurprisingly. He was a general whose loyalty and skill was second only to Octrus. Slightly younger than the Olive Knight, Kanan still showed the demeanour of a skilled warrior with much experience. The features were rather similar as well, except that Kanan's short hair and shorter beard were near black compared to Octrus's brown, and the accompanying eyes were a light green. They were both loyal and dedicated men of Raconia that Rallis highly respected. Perhaps, the prince thought, they were among the most deserving people of this occasion. This victory was theirs, not the lords and ladies that celebrated it. And he would have liked to join them, to sit quietly and listen to their intriguing tales. But Rallis was still royalty. He knew, against his wishes, they would act soberly in his presence, restraining themselves and unable to feel at ease when they deserved it most of all. So the prince continued his wander with practiced grin worn tight, trying to forget this banquet would likely last long into the night. It wasn't much longer before he heard the familiar, overjoyous shout, "Rallis!" behind him. This was the cue that Lord Devon, Herneus's brother and hence Rallis's uncle, was about to crush his shoulder with a forceful grip. So, as rehearsed, Rallis gave a laugh to mask the pain as Devon found his nephew and spun him to face the old bearded smile. Though Devon was younger than Rallis's father, he looked much older, an appearance emphasized by his long, scruffy beard and scar-covered face. For, unlike his crowned brother, Devon was one to take part in battle personally, something that, like Octrus, had accentuated his years in hardiness. "Nephew, don't tell me you were running off again," he shouted in his usual joking tone. "Why, how could you be running off when there's all these beauties about? You know you'll be king one day, and every king needs an heir," he laughed. The prince tried not to roll his eyes. "What about her?" Devon whispered, slyly pointing to a rather attractive woman amongst the crowd. Rallis just repeated his fake friendly grin. "How would you entertain yourself without me to embarrass, uncle?" "Oh, faith forbid, I'd die of boredom." And with that, Tavon grabbed another cup of wine, slapped his nephew on the shoulder again, and disappeared into the crowd as abruptly as he had appeared. Tavon could always be found relishing in any occasion that called for drinks. In fact, he was always one to seem joyous at any time. Given his uncle's presence, Rallis thought to search out for his cousin Brando, Tavon's son. And sure enough, to no surprise, he found him in the typical situation. Unlike Rallis, Brando was certainly one to take Tavon's advice, for he sat near the musicians, surrounded by beautiful girls, undoubtedly enjoying his noble stature to the fullest. But despite his philandering, the prince savoured Brando's company. He was not only a cousin, but a good friend and someone Rallis could have a substantial conversation with. "Enjoying the festivities, cousin?" Rallis mocked, approaching the absorbed group. As usual for the crown prince, he received many winks and inviting gestures from Brando's elegant company, but the prince just ignored them. He knew those winks were not for Rallis. They were for the prince of Draconia, the future king. So, to him, they may as well have been winking at anyone else in the hall. They were likely far more interested in the title of queen than Rallis himself. This was something he had meandered on countless times in the past with his cousin. As such, Brando grudgingly ushered the girls away as Rallis moved to sit. "Alright girls, fun's over, away with you. I'm sure I'll see some of you at a later hour, especially you two," he said with a wink to one and a slap on the hind of another as they strutted past the prince into the crowd. "And as to your question, I don't enjoy these celebrations any more than you do, cousin," Brando finally answered as the prince took a seat beside him. Rallis was quick to give a rather disbelieving, mocking glare at such a statement. Brando couldn't help but chuckle. "But honestly," he shrugged, "I'd be bored if I were home now, so it's not so bad." As the words left his mouth, he was still smiling as he watched the last of the girls disappear into the crowd. "Hopefully your father's truce will hold in time for us to properly celebrate the occasion. It won't be too long before the Fasken lose all patience to spill blood again." Rallis's cheek tilted down with a nod. "I do hope it will last for as long as possible. As hostile and as malicious as they are, the Faskens are quite a foe when they so blindly fight to the death for their Fey One, the so-called Jilrafakone." Brando sighed with a slight laugh on its edge. "Do we ever discuss any light-hearted topics? What's wrong with talking about girls and parties every once in a while?" "Because you would do all the talking, cousin." Brando laughed aloud at that remark. "Well, I suppose I can't argue with that," he shrugged. "And yes, the Faskens are no light enemy. Tell me, do you personally believe such a Fey One exists?" his cousin sincerely asked as they watched the festivities. Rallis hoping such joyous spirits would last in the kingdom. It was a fair and difficult question. Though all nations sought the protection and guidance of the Fey, or authors of the world as they were often called, the Faskens' absolute and unwavering devotion to a single Fey that no other Fays followed was curious indeed. "I don't know," Rallis sighed. "If one such does exist, then why is this one so detached from the Fey we know?" "Well, regardless, one thing is for certain, the Faskens want only bloodshed, and it seems eventually we'll have to deal with them for good one way or another." "Speaking of which," Brando thought to add, "please tell your father I congratulate him for his victory against them in the Battle of Dawnweir." "Why not tell him yourself?" "Because I didn't get a chance to speak with him personally, so you can tell him." "Oh, right, of course. There are so many people to talk with and ale to drink that time flew by without you ever being granted the chance." "Something like that will do." They looked at one another seriously, then came the light chuckles. This was the kind of friendliness and familiarity Rallis found that he did not share with many he knew. As prince, there were few he felt he could talk to without feeling that they were only friendly because they must be in his royal presence. Whether that was ever truly the case, he could not be sure, but at least with Brando, he knew he could share an honest conversation. So, what other news of the world out there has found your ears? And please, leave out the boring events, Rallis inquired. Brendo always had a way of knowing the latest happenings across their continent of Ursi. He was no spy master, but he listened to anyone, whether it be the lords, his father, or the many harlots he kept company. Well, Brando blew an exaggerated exhale. You probably already heard, but the king of Ethesia, King Owen, was assassinated not yet a 10-day ago. Relis's eyes flickered into a questioning glare. No, I hadn't. Wow, that's really gonna make ripples. I just heard the news yesterday. It had a long way to travel, I guess. Anyway, rumours say it was the infamous assassin or assassins that people are calling Kingsbane. Whether they're an organisation or other, they're placing the death of King Owen and some other lords on that name. How could they know it was the same assassin or group? Did they leave some kind of mark? Quite the opposite. There's never a single trace left. Other murderers leave something behind, some mud on the carpet, maybe a dead guard or two. Even the mention of a suspicious figure. But with Kingsbane, nothing. Doors that were locked are still locked, windows still shut. Hell, some suicides are now being reconsidered as the victim of Kingsbane. That's rather terrifying, Relis gave with a worried glance to his father. Though, he added, trying to evade the concerns rising in the back of his mind. I will admit it grants us reprieve to not have the Ephesian Empire looming over us while they sort this out. Brendo gave a shrug as he took a gulp of the wine sat beside him. After wiping his mouth, he added, Their aspirations are hardly any threat to us yet. The Speltier and Mount Velkmar make southern conquest almost impossible. It is said that they prepare a fleet to sail south, but such a fleet will still be many more winters away. Even then, it would be a miracle if they made it through the East Sea. Perhaps the new king shall be less ambitious, and glad to settle for the half a continent they already control, Relis reasoned. Sadly, that is unlikely. King Owen's son, Prince Ansaril, who was to inherit the throne, has supposedly already pooled resources and increased taxes to hurry that fleet along. An endeavour now fueled by his father's murder. But if he isn't careful, such early ambitions could ruin him. We can pray. Fate guide us, Relis said quietly. Hard to believe we were all allies once. Brando scoffed. Typical of you, cousin. More caught up in the past than the present. That was centuries ago, and even then it was fragile. True enough. Well, let's hope we may be done with Farska soon. If that fleet arrives with bloodlust in their eyes, we won't last long fighting them off in the north and the Farskans in the south, Relis groaned. Honestly, all this inner warfare sickens me. Everyone is just blinded by their own desires and issues. They never care for what's best for their people. The grudges and pride of lords will be the downfall of us all, Relis accused, rambling more to himself than Brando. When he finally took his attention back to his cousin, Brando was leaning back with a sly grin. What do you find so amusing? Relis's eyebrow raised. I just think the right man is going to inherit your father's throne. Relis's cheeks couldn't help but raise a little at the compliment, but his eyes rolled off back to the crowd. It wasn't something he found comfort in imagining. He loved his home, wanted to protect it and his people, but on that throne he saw so many things, and none of them were him. Like whatever was in that chair was nothing but a thing called the king, for people to load like a scapegoat of expectations. He preferred his own comfortable fantasy, one in which he was only ever Prince Relis. That makes one of us, he finally replied.